Alright guys, so I changed my seating a little bit. I'm more comfortable over here. So, second part of the three-part series, I'm kidding, on feudalism. Let's get the highlighter different here. I want red. Can we do red? No, let's do purple. See how that looks. Okay. So, warlords. So we talked about warlords being protecting of certain areas of the state. So when it comes to this time frame, 9th and early 10th century, splintered into many states with local rulers. These rulers were actually like mini lords or warlords, money to pay mercenaries and build strongholds. So if you guys think about it, do we know any type of people nowadays that are paid money for protection? See it in mob movies and stuff like that. Protection was offered to people in surrounding villages in exchange for rent. So we're kind of seeing some similarities from modern-day mafia movies as well during this time frame. Protection will be from the warlord and his mercenaries himself. So we're looking for protection of their own. And this highlighter's not doing a darn thing. Look at this. Mr. Knowles does not know what he's doing. My goodness. At least when it comes to highlighting. I like to think I know what I'm doing in other times, but highlighting, not so much today. Okay, castles. You guys are going to build a castle for me this week. We haven't checked the schedule yet. So, built by the warlords to protect their men and subjugate the surrounding populace. Subjugate to, like, subdue the surrounding... the populace is another word for population. To give you guys an easier way to look at it, these structures were wooden, known as moth and bailey castles. So here's a picture of how they were initially in the first incarnations of it. The castle would be built out of stone. From those castles, warlords or lords could ride out and control their land. This is what you guys probably know more of a castle versus this. Okay? So let's move on. Some castles to take a look at. Something more traditional you guys probably know. Something from like Cinderella. You've probably seen it at Disneyland. So, and then obviously you have the workers out in the fields tending to the crop for the kings and the nobles. Okay. Something a little bit more traditional. Give you guys an idea for your castle project later. Okay, kings and lords. So, if you were a king during the early and high Middle Ages, little separated kings from other lords, they were part of a noble class, so that higher level of this aristocracy, and were men from families who had gained wealth and land for warfare and conflict. So money and land ruled all during this time frame. So anything that they can control, obviously added to the pot. King was simply a lord who had alliances and support. You notice this throughout what we've been talking about, this word, support. We see this in multiple slides when it comes to the Middle Ages. Support was important. You see this round table, all the people, kings, kings and nobles, a little bit of a more modern picture maybe from a movie. Okay. Some lords would become more rich and powerful than the king. In certain cases, they can often result in civil war. The lord can actually go overthrow the king if he wanted to, and he would become the new king. Yes, strength in army and territory did help in this factor. Okay, the feudal system itself. So, relationship between king and noble during much of the medieval period was called feudalism. So this is the relationship that they had. Same system used by the Carolingian empires, who appointed noblemen to administer areas of their empire. In exchange, those nobles would receive titles, powers, and land. So it was like a give and take system. So you give me this, I'll give you that. You give me this, I'll give you that. And you can see a little picture here of an exchange of some sort. Maybe land, maybe food, a promise of some kind. Okay. More in a feudal system. Okay. King owned all the land in his kingdom. In theory, the land known as a fief, you guys have seen that word before, would be granted to a noble who would return swear an oath of allegiance, thus becoming a vassal to the king. So the noble will swear an oath, said, I'm only for you, king. I'm your guy. This is what I'm doing. And he would be his vassal. Noble's duties would include a set number of military service each year, some number of days, king's court, offering advice, and payments. So the noble would have a job for the king. This is what he would do in his allegiance. So he would serve in the military, serve on a king's court, and payments for certain royal expenses. So he would show it by money and by service. Okay. Noblemen would grant some of their land to lesser nobles who swore allegiance. So the nobles would take that swearing of allegiance and pass it down. So this developed that hierarchy that we've talked about, that wonderful triangle we've used in the past of lords, kings, lords, knights, and serfs. And vassals often become quite complex. Vassals could have many lords, so they would identify one as their liege lord who took precedence over the others. This was often not always the king. So you see there's that hierarchy, that level structure that we've seen many times in other parts of history during that time frame. Here's that little triangle we talked about. Kings, lords, knights, serfs. You can see land, medieval knight. You see where the protection comes in, fees, military support, all the way up. And that's pretty much a common theme. Okay, knights. From Knight's Tale, you guys have seen these guys. Distinct warrior class in the 10th century. Little more than mercenary thugs. They would serve the warlords. They would become vassals of those warlords who would build castles and subjugate the surrounding countryside. So when the castles were built, the knights became indebted to that land, to that lord or nobleman, and served them in protecting their land. You can see a couple pictures I put onto the side, giving you many different aspects of a knight. Another video if you choose to show it on your own, or see it on your own. Okay, as you saw in the movie, the main character had to come up with a lot of his own weapons and his own own stuff. His own armor, his own shields, his own lances. And this is very true in historical aspect as well. It was very expensive to be a knight. They had to buy all their own stuff. Most knights would live on a section of the lord's land and have their own peasants and serfs who would work the land and inherit the land and title. But they had to provide for their own weapons and be a knight. So they have to provide kind of like football. You got to buy all the equipment and the jersey, the pads and the helmet and stuff. Sometimes they're not free. So even during this time frame, you see that same kind of circle happening. Training. So, elite warriors of the medieval era require constant training. Started at 7, went to 14, became a squire, acting as a servant to an older knight. Saw that in the movie where the main character as a boy got handed off to another person, left his family. Squire was considered fully trained, could be knighted at a special ceremony. Okay, so 7 to 21. So you start at 7. So imagine that, 7 years old. You leave your family, begin training, 14, 21, all those things at a very young age in development. So, Code of Chivalry. So, knights were by nature violent, amassed wealth. But society tried to control this violence by developing a code of chivalry. We talked about this in class a little bit. Chivalry is not dead. Standard of behavior which defined knights as protectors of the weak and poor to serve their 3 masters. Their Lord God, their Lord, and their Lady. Okay, those are the 3 things they serve. According to knights, that is the code of chivalry. So when someone talks to you about chivalry is not dead, this is what they are referring to. Okay, heroic knight was propagated by literature and minstrels and by modern interpretations. You see knights saving the day, basically saving their woman, saving the land, the castle, more likely to raid, but they were more likely to raid and pillage for profit than to defend the weak during the early and into the high Middle Ages. So what we see in stories aren't actually historically accurate. Knights were more likely to raid and pillage for profit. Late Middle Ages professional armies of pikemen and longbowmen combined with the emergence of gunpowder units made knights less important. So technology, pikemen, longbowmen, started to come across. So even longbowmen, pikemen, and gunpowder, that's considered technology, made knights a little bit more outdated on the battlefield. Because when you can shoot people and guns were in play, you didn't really have to worry about a knight on a horseback. Tournaments, we saw that. Medieval tournaments replaced knights could train and show off their skills. Combat, the most popular was the joust between mounted knights. And you see a picture here. Saw that in Knight's Tale. Saw the sword competitions and everything else. Very, very true. Very historically accurate. All right, serfs and peasants. Bottom of the bottom. So serfs and peasants were at the bottom of the triangle, if you will. Swore an oath to the Lord, worked the land, paid taxes, and received protection. Land to grow food and housing. So serfs were the people who worked that land for his local lord. You can see the pictures off to the side. Okay, lord's estate included all the lands and buildings and was called a manor. So the whole thing, castle included, this is the manor. Serfs rarely left it. It was self-sufficient. It provided everything they ever needed. So they never could go out. They never needed to go out. Everything was there. The food, the market, places, everything they needed was in that area, that estate. Kind of kept the serfs and the peasants more controlled because they never had to leave, so they had to become very self-dependent on that estate. So this is the manor. So you can see peasants growing vegetables, wheat, large house. Here's the manor, village church, blacksmith, harvesting wheat. So this is where they would live and they never have to leave. Here's sheep over here under my picture. Never have to leave that area. Okay. They didn't swear an oath though, not tied to the land, but they needed to pay rent. Some peasants could actually work their own land, and both serfs and peasants had to pay a variety of taxes, including a 10% tithe of their earnings to the church. Nowadays, if you go to church, you pay an offering. They ask for an offering. It's called a tithe. So something to go give back to the church, because remember, during this time, Christianity is still in play. People still believed in God. It was still a central part of the system. Okay, serfs and peasants accepted the lot in life. Their lot in life because they believed God determined their role. That was their role. To leave your village and your Lord would be asking to question God's wisdom, which would be considered a sin. So if you left, the Lord would say, why would you question God? You can't do that. That's a sin. You can't leave. God wants you here. That's what they were trained to believe. Okay, church. Played a critical role in the system, according to kings of the lords. Alliances stretched back to 498. And the church would instill a sense of one's place in society. This would give everyone their ability to know where their role was. Very useful for a ruler to control people. Okay. Bishops, archbishops, and cardinals would often be nobles with their vassals. Complicated allegiances to both the king and the pope would result in a series of conflicts. Those are the couple conflicts that I have listed at the bottom, as you can see. Still being in the role of the church, still conflict in the religious aspect. Okay. So we did have division through the Middle Ages. People who fought, kings, nobles, knights. People who prayed, priests, bishops, monks. People who worked, peasants, and serfs. There was division, and those were those three classes. That still existed to everyone during that time. So it ignored the merchant and craftsman. It still existed though. So merchants and craftsmen still existed during this time frame, began to grow in the size. So did the merchant class. So the new class would undermine the feudal system as merchants had no need for land. So people who were selling stuff had no need for land. Since the feudal system was based upon land, merchants kind of upended that system. Okay. Feudalism would last for over a millennium in Europe, taking root after the fall of Rome. What made the rise of feudalism happen? Absence of powerful government. So it was all centralized little places like the castles of the lords of the land and warlords. They with money had money for mercenaries and castles. The decline of feudalism happened because of the merchant class. Professional armies made nobles less important to kings. So the professional armies came out, didn't need the nobles anymore, so it kind of made feudalism fall. So, that's it. Make sure you have everything filled out before you turn in. We'll see you later.